Okay, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuffs. Here, a really great review for you guys from the brand Seiko. A little bit about them. They were founded back in 1881. They are Japanese in origin and now have factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry level to high end. And in terms of type of watch, this is a dive watch. Some key common characteristics in design language when you're looking for a diver, of course, you're going to find typically water resistance with a screw down crown, something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelets. This is the Seiko Prospex SRPL13 Mini Samurai, and it's essentially a more compact and contemporary take on Seiko's classic samurai style of entry-level automatic angular dive watches. These go for $575, and this particular unit was lent in by Mark. Yes, the legend Mark of LongIslandWatch.com. And yeah, much appreciated. Definitely check their site links in terms of current availability as well as any active discount codes or sales. Mark has been a pillar within the community, and I've personally purchased watches from him many times over the years. Also, a couple of different straps. So, especially within the realm of Seiko, he's definitely kind of an OG within the community. So I'm really happy to be collaborating with him and hopefully getting a little bit more traffic over about this particular model, which I've been hyped about since its release last year, but only now recently have been able to get in hand, in the metal. And I have to say, I'm quite impressed. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, as you can see, very nice, great proportions. I think this one might be marketed as like a 41.5, but that is across the bezel. The case itself is actually a perfect 40 millimeters. So you can see there is a slight overhang there. It is only 12.3 millimeters thick and 49 millimeters lug to lug, which is a little bit on the longer side. But as you can see, the nice thing, two things to notice is one is that the male end link is actually inset and directly sloping down, which follows the case lines beautifully. Also, the case lines slope down, so this is not a flat plain slab side there. Definitely a nice angular down sweep, which is going to really help this hug the wrist quite nicely. With that, this actually does have a flat mineral hardlex crystal, and some of you might be pretty upset with that. Me personally, I've never been able to scratch a hardlex, and that doesn't mean that I just baby my watches. I've pretty much scratched every other mineral crystal I've ever had on a watch except for hardlex. So take that for what you will. In my experience, hardlex is harder to scratch. And honestly, you're still getting all the benefits. The nice thing is, one, the lower cost. Two, you don't even need any type of anti-reflective coating because of the clarity. And then, so, I mean, if it doesn't really scratch, it's less shatter prone than a sapphire. Of course, I would prefer a sapphire in any case, but this isn't for me a detriment to the watch. It does help keep the watch lower in price, and that also goes with the 4R movement, which also has some silver linings to it too, because some, in their experience, I've had really good luck with the 6R movements. I know there are people who didn't even like the 6R15. I know with the later 6R35s and 6R55s where they've extended the power reserve, they can be a little bit hit and miss. In others' experiences, in mine, I've been, quite lucky, I guess. But from my understanding, a lot of folks have been very solid with the 4R movements, and similar to the NH movements you would get in a micro brand, even in maybe one of Mark's Long Island watches. They're very stable, right? So this is a nice, stable, predictable movement. So it is going to beat at 3 hertz or 21,600 vibrations per hour, which is actually more standard than it used to be, considering how many Swiss watches have actually slowed down their beat rates to elongate and extend those power reserves. But this one does still only have the 41-hour power reserve, which isn't the worst, but it's definitely not super competitive in terms of an extended power reserve. The case back is a nice solid case back. It still has the blue sticker on there. Yes, whoever purchases this piece is going to be lucky enough to peel that off. Maybe it'll be me, because honestly, I'm going to have trouble sending this one back because I honestly think it's that good. This is just a super well-rounded, great kind of, hey, if I only had one dive watch and my budget was under $1,000, like what would I get? And I love a watch on a bracelet. I mean, it'd be tough to argue against this when you consider the in-house lineage and, of course, the look. I've even noticed a nice faint little sunray pattern to that, which is pretty cool and a little reminiscent of the 39 millimeter Pelagos, right? Which I think this watch does a very nice kind of, hey, affordable alternative. You want that, you could get this type of proposition. And the cool thing is, of course, this does predate the Pelagos in terms of the original samurai watches, right? The original Seiko samurais. So I think that's pretty cool. Some of you might be upset that I'm calling it a Seiko, a mini samurai, instead of calling it like a Shogurai or a Ronin or something like that. But for me, you know, that's just the fun of nicknames for Seikos, and like whether it's a Suna, I'm sorry, the Sumo, the Tuna, or the Turtle. I went with Mini Samurai when I looked at this because I think of the Mini Turtle or the Mini Tuna, and I don't think Baby Alpinist. So why Mini versus Baby, or maybe even Marine Master Reduced, right? So there's always going to be a fun little nickname, but let me know down in the comments below if you're okay with Mini Samurai or if you prefer something else altogether. Now, the dial that I mentioned there with that nice faint mild sunray has raised indices, which are really quite nice. And you can see, thanks to the placement of the date window, keep everything very, very balanced and very symmetrical. Also, with that date, it's nicely color matched and also circular punched because it has more angular, straighter indices flanking it. Typically, that's something that you'll notice where they'll use the circular cut out for, you know, to fit in between more squared off indices. And if they're round indices, then they'll use the square window and we'll have it actually canted to where it won't be parallel with the rest of the text. I like this. I think this looks really good. It doesn't bother me at all. Some people don't like it at all, but for me, it's kind of my preference at this point. In terms of that handset there, I think it's very cool. They can be very hit and miss. There was a couple years there, guys, where Seiko's hands were not good looking. And that's why I feel like was something that really contributed to the Seiko mod madness, because everybody wanted to switch out their Seiko hands because they had good looking dials, but the handsets were just weird. So here, I love this handset. I think it looks great. It flows really well with the indices, very balanced. Also, you're going to get brushing in terms of the detailed finishes there on the hour and minute hand, and then polished on the seconds. So you're going to have a nice amount of contrast and light play in a rather monochromatic setup. Also, this has, of course, divers 200 meters of water resistance, which means that it is ISO compliant. 20 millimeter lugs, drilled lugs at that. So very nice there. Screw down crown. Oh, did I mention 120 click bezel? Ooh. I love the shielded loom pip there, so that's not going to fade or get dusty or tarnished or anything like that. Very Seiko-like in terms of the action, so if you dig a good Seiko bezel action, you'll like this one. Nice balance between smooth and clicky. I will say the knurling isn't quite as sharp as compared to the crown, which I don't think is overly sharp. I think that's actually probably dialed in, where this might feel a bit soft. I mean, it doesn't appear soft. You can see there, it's nice and fine, actually. But I think I might have preferred it to be just a touch grippier for that tactile engagement. But I will say that if it was grippier, then, you know, maybe the bezel would have felt soft. Whereas here, the bezel action actually feels pretty well tuned in. So, you know, there are trade-offs there. Back to the bracelet here, 20 millimeter lug width, which is going to be great in terms of swapping this out, making it a real strap monster. But I love this bracelet. I mean, it wasn't too many years ago. This was an aftermarket bracelet for these watches, and Seiko's listened. They've kept an eye on the market, and they've brought this here. This is a pin and collar system, though, which I don't mind. I actually kind of prefer pins and collars these days just because I'm really good at swapping those those out. And I find them to be quite reliable. So with that said, let's actually get this piece on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this thing wears quite nicely. Of course, I do have a slightly larger than average wrist, but you guys can see it's quite tall and round. So it's not like it's super flat, wide, and accommodating there. Ooh, look at the angles on this one. Again, I'm really loving the case work here that really flows beautifully into that solid end link and 3-link setup. Ooh. And then, of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the lens, you're going to get a fair amount of perspective distortion. It's going to make the watch seem a lot larger than it actually is. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame so that you guys can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio in terms of, you know, how this may lay on your own wrist. And I have to say, this looks great. I mean, this just hits such a sweet spot, guys. I love that it hits, again, it's that sweet spot. Like this from afar is going to read as a dive watch, as a tool watch. And then you get close to it and then you'll figure out which one it is. And you see that it's a Seiko and it looks like a Seiko, which I can appreciate. But it's also a little bit more mainstream because it has a 3 o'clock crown versus a signature Seiko 4 o'clock crown. So there's these still, you know, a couple of things that might make this something for somebody who may have, you know, shied away from Seiko in the past. But then, you know, maybe you're not huge into rounded, bubbly cushion cases or oversized divers. And here, I mean, this just wears beautifully. I mean, again, the comparables to something like a 39 millimeter Pelagos, I completely understand there. Of course, completely different price range, completely different market, right? That's more of a, you know, ultra bang per buck entry level luxury piece, whereas this is going to be something that is really an entry level automatic piece, which I think is where it really, really delivers. Is if you're, you know, cross shopping and you're like, well, I really like the turtle reissue, but, you know, which I think is a classic. And I think, you know, it kind of is the new SKX in terms of the one diver from Seiko that you should own, you know, and that you can still buy new. But if you're not onto, you know, into their bracelets, which aren't the greatest, or the, you know, wearing your diver on a rubber strap, I think this is one of the best case and bracelet options available on the market today, within this price point. Of course, the clasp isn't anything special there, guys. It's actually mostly stamped, but you know what? It fits, it flows, and I have to say that's not always the case. There's a lot of times brands can be so quick to kind of hit all of the spec sheet bullets. They don't think about wearability as much, and honestly, as much as people on first sight will say, ooh, I love the fact that this has this big chunky milled clasp with a lot of these features. A lot of the times they can be a little bit oversized, overbearing, and just break up the overall flow. And you can see this just flows perfectly with the case. Could it be more robust? Absolutely. Could it be more expensive? Also, yes. But I think, and within this price point, under $600, and of course you're going to probably get it for a good amount less than that. On, you know, I think full retail is $575. So you'll probably get this for around $500 or less. I mean, it's hard for me to argue with this one just because it's that good. It has a lot of its bases covered and it's giving you so much. And again, a lot of in-house pedigree down to growing their own jewels, creating their own, pretty much all of their components down to the lubrications are made with in-house from Seiko. So, I mean, that's a certain level. I know that that's not for everybody and not everybody has to appreciate that. But for those of you that do, you know, it's hard to argue again with that level of pedigree in terms of in-house ness and as well as, you know, the historical significance of Seiko dive watches, right? Seiko within the space of developing nautical themed diver, you know, oriented tool watches. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera back and get this off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, the light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Oh, yes, Lumibright. There it is. It is bright, luminous. And the nice thing is, again, as much as some of you might have disliked that date window, I mean, it absolutely pays off for those of you that love a good set of lume. My goodness. But one thing I like to, of course, work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because I was going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming out of buildings. Oh, check that out. There it is. Look at that mild sun ray. It's there. It exists. I wasn't lying. So again, back to the transitional lighting. You're not always going to be in great lighting. You're not going to be in studio lighting. So yeah, it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, so that you just get a better idea. I mean, look at the way the light uniformly glides across that brushing. Very, very handsome. And you know, definitely gives you tons of tool watch vibes, and it still remains quite legible. Like, where can I, even if I try to wash it out, make it more of an anthracite color on the dial, you're still getting so much legibility thanks to the size and the scale of those indexes. Then, of course, if we get into the darkness, we get a little here, there, anywhere. This thing is going to be very, very legible. I also do like the way that the aluminum bezel insert that is coated has such a beautiful matte sheen to it that, again, can capture light in a little way that does play off of the dial in a little way to just give you something that feels quite cohesive. And that's another thing that really helps me enjoy this watch. I mean, the whole thing, right? From the handset to the dial to the bezel insert to the bezel itself, the bezel grip tying into the crown, the angular case tying into the angular bracelet. It just comes together super nicely for me, guys. And that's, again, you can't always get that, especially when it's a more original watch. I mean, you can't always, even at this price point, find a watch that feels very original. So the fact that Seiko is able to kind of deliver you with that type of experience at a pretty bargain cost, guys, I can absolutely appreciate. So closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, it wears just about perfectly, really great proportions. And although angular, still hugs the wrist surprisingly well. Reads impressively thin, honestly, with that mid case, while really never approaching flimsy. And I mean, it reads thin because it actually is pretty thin. 12.3 millimeters for an ISO diver is pretty good. Are there things that are, yeah, you can find stuff that's thinner, but hey, this is pretty good, especially considering the fact that it has, you know, one of Seiko's 4R movements inside. Now, in terms of model variants, you know, it's also available in a deep red color combination or a blacked out colorway on strap only. So there's no blacked out bracelet. I think this is so nice on the bracelet that that's kind of what I lean towards, but I can totally understand if somebody wanted to go for the more blacked out aesthetic, very tactical. You know, you could even put it on a nylon strap or something like that if you really wanted to really kind of play up the commando style. But in terms of comparable models, I think when you consider the in-house nature, again, of these watches at under a $600 price point, there's actually less comparables out there than you might think. I think a direct competitor, you know, when you think about Orient or Citizen, those are generally going to be cheaper, absolutely. But you know, they're going to be more abundant as well and easier to find and a little bit cheaper. Again, like I mentioned, sometimes noticeably cheaper, but also noticeably less detailed by comparison, right? Like a lot of these little details we went over today, guys, they're not going to show up on the spec sheet. They're going to show up on your wrist in terms of your own enjoyment. And if you're not down with that, cool, then maybe this isn't the watch for you. It doesn't mean it's a bad watch. It just means that it's not the one for you. So for me, guys, bottom line, you know, much like the mini turtles and mini tunas, or now even the updated Marine Master 300s, you know, I think it's just great to see Seiko tweak their iconic formulas to offer smaller sized variations of some of their now classic silhouettes. No, it doesn't have sapphire, but that's kind of be expected with a 4R powered Prospex diver. And as impressive as, you know, a future King mini samurai sounds, I don't think it's really needed here. Like, again, it'd be cool. I would definitely check it out. but I don't think it's needed. I think this is like a good sweet spot, especially considering there's not a lot of people. There are a lot of people that really don't care about the specs. They just want a watch and they want to get it at the most accessible price point in there. Not really, as long as that's basic things, hacking, hand winding, mechanical, some type of pedigree and an original, aesthetic, then they're all for it. So this is, it's again, these aren't for everyone, but for the market, for the demographic, I'm glad that they're still making these types of watches so that people can, purchase these potentially and enjoy them. This is really just a no frills everyday diver that hits a real sweet spot in my humble opinion. And I could easily see this one becoming a new default automatic Seiko diver on bracelet for generations to come. With models like the 62 MAS inspired SPB 453 listing for around $1,300, having something like this at under $600 at $575. Again, that's full retail, and I'm sure you'll pay less. Especially if you hit up Mark from Long Island Watch, links in the description. I think this is still a great watch. So let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like. And if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.